Hello everybody, today we are going to discuss about Hellenism, Hellenistic period, Hellenic criticism. So this word Hellenism or Hellenistic, has originated from the word Hellas. Actually, that is the original word for Greece. Yes, Hellas. So this is the original word for Greece. And these words, Hellenism, Hellenistic period, so they have originated from this root Hellas. And this period, Hellenistic period, actually we term the period a period of medieval history from the death of Alexander, that is 323 BC to 31 BC, which is signified by the Battle of Actium. So the period between these two events of history, events of Mediterranean history, is called Hellenistic period. Now there is a difference between Hellenistic period and Hellenic period. Hellenic period is between 507 BC to 323 BC. So that is actually called Hellenic period. Now what are the other things which are related to this period? So in this period, during this Hellenistic period, Greek art, literature, Greek culture, it was actually on the top, on the apex, pinnacle of everything. It spread everywhere in this world, and we find the evidences of this even in the today's Pakistan and Afghanistan. So it was in the form of, it was in a fragmented form, and it spread all over the world because they were quite dominant in those times and they ruled almost all the world. So it spread all over the world. Today's, we can say, the Mediterranean region, the Eastern Mediterranean region, and all those parts from Greece to this eastern part, it spread and it was at the top. Now in those times the literature also flourished, the art, the Greek art also flourished, and we had many philosophers, many writers, many poets, many playwrights. All these things actually grew to an extreme state. Now the playwrights were Sophocles, we can say not just Sophocles, there were other very eminent playwrights as well. So Euripides was one of them, and Aristophanes was another. So these playwrights, they are still known and remembered for their work. Only of those times, only some of the works remain today, only some manuscripts remain, others have all got lost in all these years. And apart from these playwrights, we have other poets and writers and philosophers as well. So Telemachus was one of them. He was a poet critic, and in those times what happened actually, that these poets and critics, they actually sought patronage from the kings. They wrote about kings and royalty, and even what Telemachus did, he equated the king to Zeus and Apollo of in those times, and thus in that way actually they sought the favor of the kings. And this Telemachus, he actually popularized the short form of the poems. He wrote in we can say epigrammatic forms, short, very short poems. He said big books are big evil. That's what he said. But his own student, that is Apollonius of Rhodes, he popularized epic form of poetry, and his Argonauts is a very famous work. So yes, I should write it all here so that you can understand this I am talking of. Telemachus and his student, who was Apollonius, and this Apollonius wrote Argonauts. So these were the poet critics and the writers of those times. Now if we talk of Hellenic criticism, so there come the role of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. These were the chief, or these were the main philosophers and critics of those times. We have the works like Republic, we have Aristotle's work, Poetics. So all these works they have written, and they criticized, and they just developed their own philosophies of those times. So according to Plato, on whose name we have Platonism, after him we have Platonism. So Plato actually believed in ideal state of things. His ideas or his notions were all about the ideal state of things, and he criticized and underrated poetry. He said that literature brings out emotions and feelings, and reason guides them. So he was more in favor of reason than just literature and poetry. According to him, poetry is twice removed from reality, and he said that whatever we see, the objects that we see, they are just imperfect imitations of the notions and ideas. So, and he actually said that said about what poetry ought to be, what literature ought to be. That was what he said. Means he always talked about the ideal form, whereas his student Aristotle, he said what poetry is, what literature is, what art is. So Plato's philosophy is called Platonism, and that is all about the ideal state of things. And Aristotle's philosophy is said to be peripatetism. So in his philosophy, he actually chose a mean way, middle path, avoided extremes, and he said that we should always choose the middle path of things, and that's what his philosophers did. And so his philosophy is called peripatetic philosophy or peripatetism. That is what his philosophy is called. Then there were other schools of philosophy in those times. There was Sophism, there was Cynicism, there was Pythagoreanism. So different philosophers came up or emerged in those times, and according to their beliefs and ideas, they started their own schools of philosophy, or they propagated their own philosophies and their own ideas. So actually there were skeptics as well, there were academic skeptics, and all these philosophers and all these idealists, they have their own certain beliefs which they just stick to those beliefs, and they followed those ideas. So what they had to say, as I said, the sophists, they believed in rhetoric, that rhetoric is quite important. So they told us about the rhetoric, how to use the rhetoric. Then there was Stoicism, and the Stoicists said that we should simply live in accordance with nature. That's what the Stoicists felt. They should that we should live by the virtue and goodness. We should follow that. Then there were Cynicists, and they followed Cynicism. So they believed that we should reject all what health, wealth, all materialism and all. And again, what the Stoicists said, we should live in accordance with nature. So actually in those times, paganism, the culture was pagan culture, and everything was godly, like the earth is God, the tree is God, the river is God. So they worshipped all nature, and nature was prime for them, nature was important for them. and this and it went on in those times. The Greek criticism, the English criticism came in 16th century. Until then we only had this Greek criticism, and which was later followed by Roman literature and Roman criticism. English criticism came only in 16th century, and in this later times, we can say we have another term got popular, and that was Neoclassical Hellenism. And what was Neoclassical Hellenism? There was an archaeologist, and he was actually Wickelmann. He was a German archaeologist. His name was Wickelmann, and he brought back the concept of this Hellenism. He said that he believed in, or he said that the essence of Greek art lies in simplicity and sedate grandeur. That's what he said, that essence, actually the important element of Greek art lies in these things. What? Simple nobility, or say noble simplicity and sedate grandeur. So it lies in that, and he tried to follow that. And these ideas were later followed by second generation romantics, or the younger romantics, which include John Keats, P.B. Shelley, and Lord Gould Byron. So they turned to Greek literature and art for its beauty and transcendental philosophy. They turned to Greek literature, and they tried to follow that in their work of art, in their poetry and all that. So this is actually all about Hellenism and Hellenic criticism and Hellenistic period. So as I said, actually this Hellenistic period is the period between 323 BC to 31 BC, which from the time of Alexander's death to the emergence of Roman Empire, when actually Greek literature was at its peak. It was at the top of everything. And as I mentioned here, the younger romantics, so I must mention about Grecian Urn, the poem by John Keats. So that too involved the mention of Greek art and Greek culture. So it was, and so in those times, in Greek times, or in those medieval part of the history, we only had pagan culture all over the world. It was only after the emergence of, we can say, Abrahamic culture like Christianity and Islam, this was all, we can say, slowly and gradually it all vanished and disappeared, and the world was overtaken by Christianity and other religions. So, and even today in we can say in some part of the world like India and such, we find the Hellenic culture, though it is different. We don't call it Hellenic culture in Indian territory and all. Here it is Hinduism and so, but yes, the those pagan culture, we can say, rather than saying Hellenic culture, the pagan culture is still there in force or evident in the Hinduism and all such. So that is all about Hellenistic period and Hellenism or Hellenic criticism. So what I mean is this the mention or the talk of Greek literature, art and philosophy is Hellenism. Whenever we mention or whenever we talk of anything Greek, like Greek art, literature, culture, so it is actually, in other terms, it is Hellenism. It is about Hellenistic period, it is about Hellenic culture. So it is simply a different name for Greek art and literature, which totally followed pagan religion and pagan culture. And the later in the neoclassical Roman, European neoclassical period, which was in 17th and 18th century, we find a turning back to Hellenic culture, and that was named Neoclassical Hellenism. So this is all about Hellenism, and I hope it is quite clear to you. The idea is now very much patent, so I'll come up with more such things for you. So till then, keep watching, be in touch. Thank you very much.